The November rain drummed against the glass walls of my corner office on the 42nd floor of the Hancock Tower in downtown Chicago. From up here, the city looked like a circuit board, tiny lights blinking in perfect patterns, each one representing someone's life, someone's story. But at 11:47 p.m. on that Tuesday night, I felt more disconnected from those lives than ever before. I should have been celebrating. The Morrison acquisition had finally closed, adding another $50 million to our quarterly revenue. My assistant Sarah had left a bottle of Dom Perignon on my desk with a congratulatory note, but it sat unopened, gathering dust like most gestures of recognition in my life. Success, I'd learned, was a cold companion when you had no one to share it with. The elevator descended silently, carrying me down from my ivory tower to street level. The lobby was empty except for Marcus, the night security guard, who gave me his usual polite nod. "Working late again, Mr. Harrison?" he asked, though we both knew it wasn't really a question. It was my routine: work until exhaustion, sleep for 5 hours, repeat. It had been this way for 3 years, ever since Elena left, taking with her not just my heart but any semblance of a life outside these walls. The November air hit me like a slap as I stepped onto Michigan Avenue. Chicago in late fall was unforgiving, the kind of cold that cut through expensive wool coats and found its way into your bones. The wind whipped off Lake Michigan, carrying with it the promise of the brutal winter ahead. Most people hurried past with their heads down, wrapped in scarves and focused on getting home to warm apartments and waiting families. I wasn't in any hurry. My penthouse condo on Lakeshore Drive was just another empty space filled with expensive furniture and the echo of my own footsteps. The walk to the bus stop had become part of my nightly ritual, not because I needed public transportation. My Tesla sat patiently in the underground garage, but because it gave me time to think, to pretend I was just another person with somewhere important to be. The CTA bus stop on State Street was nearly deserted at this hour. A few late-shift workers huddled under the plastic shelter, their breath visible in small clouds as they checked their phones and watched for the next bus. The city's rhythm at midnight was different, slower, more honest somehow. The pretense of the day had fallen away, leaving only the essential movements of people trying to get home. That's when I saw her. Tucked behind a metal trash can, almost invisible in the shadows, was a small gray and white cat. She was pressed against the brick wall of the building, her body curved protectively around something I couldn't quite see. Her fur was damp from the mist that had been falling all evening, and she was shaking. Whether from cold or fear, I couldn't tell. I stopped walking. In 3 years of passing this same bus stop, I'd seen plenty of urban wildlife. Pigeons, the occasional rat, even a raccoon once. But something about this cat's posture, the way she seemed to be guarding something precious, made me pause. As I moved closer, she looked up at me with the largest green eyes I'd ever seen. They weren't the typical feral cat eyes, wild and distrustful. These eyes held something different, a maternal desperation, a plea for help that transcended species. That's when I realized what she was protecting. Nestled against her belly were 3 tiny kittens, so small they couldn't have been more than a few days old. Their eyes were still closed and they were mewing softly, barely audible above the city's constant hum. The mother cat had somehow given birth in this harsh urban environment and was now trying to keep her babies alive against impossible odds. I crouched down slowly, my expensive Italian leather shoes scraping against the wet concrete. "Hey there, Mama," I whispered, my voice barely audible. She watched me warily but didn't move away. Exhaustion had clearly overridden her flight instincts. The rain began to fall harder, and I watched as she tried to position herself to shield her kittens from the droplets. It was a losing battle. The concrete beneath them was already soaked, and the temperature was dropping toward freezing. These babies wouldn't survive the night out here. I thought about my empty condo, about the unopened champagne and the congratulatory note. I thought about Elena, who used to say I had no room in my heart for anything that couldn't be quantified in quarterly reports. Maybe she was right. Maybe I'd become so focused on building my empire that I'd forgotten how to care about anything real. But looking at this small family fighting for survival in the shadow of the buildings I'd helped construct, something stirred in my chest, something I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't a business decision or a calculated risk. It was simply human. I pulled out my phone and called my driver. "James, I need you to bring the car around to State and Madison." "Yes, I know it's midnight." "And James, turn up the heat." While I waited, I sat down on the wet concrete beside the cat family, ignoring what the moisture would do to my $3,000 suit. The mother cat watched me with those impossible green eyes, and gradually, her shaking subsided just a little. "We're going to figure this out," I told her, surprised by the conviction in my own voice. For the first time in years, I was making a decision with my heart instead of my head, and it terrified me more than any boardroom negotiation ever had. The ride to my condo was unlike any I'd ever taken. James had lined the back seat with towels from the trunk, emergency supplies he kept for Chicago's unpredictable weather. The mother cat, whom I'd somehow managed to coax into a carrier borrowed from a 24-hour veterinary clinic, sat quietly beside me with her 3 kittens. The vet tech who'd helped me had been amazed by her cooperation. "Most strays would scratch your eyes out before letting you near their babies," she'd said, handing me a small bag of kitten formula and feeding supplies. "This one's special. She knows you're trying to help." Now, ascending in the elevator to the 38th floor, I wondered what the hell I was doing. My condo was a monument to minimalism. All clean lines, chrome fixtures, and expensive art that I'd bought because my decorator said it made statements. What statements it made, I'd never been quite sure, but it certainly didn't say, "Welcome, small animals." The elevator opened directly into my living room, a feature that had impressed countless business associates and exactly one woman who'd ultimately decided it felt too much like living in a fancy prison. Elena's words still echoed sometimes in the pristine spaces. I set the carrier down on my glass coffee table and opened the door. The mother cat emerged cautiously, her green eyes taking in the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Lake Michigan. The city sparkled below us, but she seemed uninterested in the view that had cost me 7 figures. Instead, she was focused on finding a safe place for her babies. The kittens were mewing more urgently now, and I realized they were probably hungry. Following the instructions the vet tech had given me, I prepared the formula, warming it to body temperature and filling the tiny bottles that looked absurdly small in my hands that were used to gripping golf clubs and signing multi-million-dollar contracts. Feeding newborn kittens, I discovered, was nothing like the business negotiations I'd mastered. There was no strategy, no leverage to be gained. Just 3 tiny creatures who needed care every few hours around the clock. The smallest one, a gray and white female that looked exactly like her mother, had trouble latching onto the bottle. I found myself on my knees on the marble floor trying to guide the nipple to her mouth with a patience I'd never known I possessed. "Come on, little one," I murmured, my voice taking on a soft tone I hadn't used since reading bedtime stories to my nephew years ago. "You've got to eat." The mother cat watched me intently from her perch on my leather sofa, a piece of furniture that had never been truly lived on until this moment. She seemed to approve of my efforts, occasionally coming over to check on my technique. When the smallest kitten finally began to nurse from the bottle, she actually purred, a sound that filled my silent condo with something I couldn't quite name. By 3 a.m., I had set up a makeshift nursery in my guest bedroom, using towels and blankets to create a warm, enclosed space. The mother cat had claimed the entire area as her domain, moving her babies one by one to the spot she deemed safest. I sat on the floor beside their nest, still wearing my wrinkled business suit, watching this tiny family settle into their new home. The rain continued to patter against the windows, but inside we were warm and dry. I thought about how different this night might have ended if I'd driven straight home as usual, if I hadn't stopped at that bus stop, if I hadn't looked into those desperate green eyes. My phone buzzed with emails. There were always emails, but for the first time in years I ignored them. Instead, I found myself naming the kittens in my head. The smallest, the gray and white female, reminded me of a pearl, so I called her Pearl. The larger female was solid gray with white paws, like she was wearing tiny socks. Socks seemed appropriate. The male was predominantly white with gray patches and had a regal bearing despite being barely a week old. King felt right. And the mother. She'd been watching me with such intelligence, such gratitude, that I found myself thinking of the Greek word for wisdom. Sophia. She looked like a Sophia. As dawn began to creep through the windows, painting the lake in shades of pink and gold, I realized I hadn't thought about quarterly reports or acquisition targets for hours. Instead, I'd been completely absorbed in the simple act of caring for these small beings who depended entirely on my kindness. Elena had been wrong about one thing. My heart wasn't too small to care about something beyond profit margins. It had just been waiting for the right reason to open again. I called my assistant Sarah from the guest bedroom floor, whispering so as not to wake the sleeping family. "Sarah, I need you to clear my schedule until noon," I said. "Are you feeling all right, Mr. Harrison?" You never miss the 8 a.m. staff meeting. I looked at Sophia, curled protectively around her babies, and felt something shift permanently in my chest. I'm better than I've been in years. Oh, and Sarah? I'm going to need the name of a good veterinarian, someone who makes house calls. After I hung up, I settled back against the wall, watching this small family sleep safely for the first time in days. Outside, Chicago was waking up, people hurrying to work, pursuing their own versions of success. But in this quiet room, I'd found something worth more than any deal I'd ever closed. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't alone in my own home. 3 weeks later, my condo had undergone a revolution that no interior designer could have planned. Cat toys dotted the pristine marble floors like colorful landmines. A climbing tree now occupied the corner where my Basquiat painting used to hang. I'd moved the art to storage after Sophia had shown absolutely no appreciation for its 7-figure value, preferring instead to sharpen her claws on its frame. The kittens had opened their eyes and begun to explore, transforming my minimalist sanctuary into an adventure playground. Pearl, still the smallest, had claimed my home office as her domain, often sleeping curled up on my keyboard while I worked. Socks had developed an obsession with my shoelaces and had cost me 2 pairs of Italian leather Oxfords. King, true to his name, surveyed his domain from the highest perches he could reach, which increasingly included my shoulders during video calls. "Richard, is that a cat on your head?" Bill Morrison had asked during our quarterly review call with the board. "Kitten, actually," I'd replied, gently removing King from where he'd perched atop my hair. "His name is King." The awkward silence that followed was worth the subtle shift I'd been feeling in how I approached these meetings. The numbers still mattered, the deals still needed to close, but something about having these small lives depending on me had given me perspective on what truly constituted success. My daily routine had completely reorganized itself around feeding schedules. The 6 a.m. wake-up call was no longer my alarm clock, but Pearl's insistent mewing for her morning bottle. The evening feedings had become a meditation of sorts, 30 minutes of focused attention on nothing but ensuring these growing kittens were healthy and content. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the veterinarian who'd been making house calls, had become a regular visitor. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and gentle hands who seemed genuinely amazed by Sophia's story. "Street cats usually don't adapt this well to indoor life," she explained during one of her visits, watching Sophia lounging contentedly on my leather chair. "She must have been someone's pet before she ended up on the streets. The way she trusts you, the way she's accepted your help, it's unusual." "What do you think happened to her?" I asked, stroking Sophia's head. She purred and pressed against my hand, a gesture that still filled me with wonder. "Hard to say. Could have been abandoned, could have gotten lost. What matters is that she found you when she needed help most." Dr. Hernandez smiled as Pearl attempted to climb her medical bag. "These kittens are thriving. Sophia's milk production is excellent and they're gaining weight perfectly. You're doing something right." The comment stayed with me long after she left. I was doing something right. It was such a simple phrase, but it meant more to me than any business accolade I'd ever received. Helena used to say I measured everything by metrics and benchmarks, but she'd been wrong. The purr of a contented cat couldn't be quantified, and the trust in Sophia's green eyes couldn't be graphed or analyzed. Yet these were the successes that mattered most. My penthouse had also become an unexpected social hub. James, my driver, now asked about the cats every morning, and had started bringing treats just in case. Marcus, the security guard, always inquired about their health and had confessed that his daughter was studying to be a veterinarian. Even my housekeeper, Maria, who came twice a week, had fallen under their spell. "Mr. Harrison," she'd said in her gentle accent, watching Socks play with a feather toy. "This place feels like a home now. Before it was beautiful but empty. Now it has soul." Soul. That was exactly what had been missing from my life. Not just from my condo, but from everything. I'd built a successful company, accumulated wealth, earned respect in the business community, but I'd never created anything that had soul. Until now. The most significant change wasn't in my living space, but in my perspective. Board meetings that once felt crucial now seemed manageable. Deals that would have kept me awake at night worrying were addressed during business hours and then set aside. When I came home, there were more important things waiting for me. 3 growing kittens who needed playtime and attention, and a mother cat who had somehow decided I was worth trusting with her family. One evening, as I sat on my couch with my laptop balanced on my knees and Pearl sleeping across my feet, I found myself video calling my nephew Danny in Seattle. I hadn't spoken to my brother's family in months, always too busy with work to maintain the connection. "Uncle Richard!" Danny's 8-year-old face filled the screen, and I realized how much he'd grown since our last conversation. "Hey, buddy. How's second grade treating you?" "It's great. Mom said you got some cats. Can I see them?" I turned the laptop so he could see King, who was batting at a toy mouse with intense concentration. Danny's delighted laughter filled my condo, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the central heating. "They're so cool. What are their names? Can they do tricks? Do they sleep in your bed?" For 20 minutes, we talked about nothing but cats, and it was the best conversation I'd had in months. When my brother Mike took the phone, his first words surprised me. "You sound different, Richard." "Happier." "Do I?" "Yeah. More like the brother I remember from before you became a corporate titan." There was warmth in his voice, not the careful politeness that had characterized our recent interactions. After we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my living room, watching my small family settle in for the night. Sophia had claimed her favorite spot on the couch beside me, close enough that I could feel her purring. The kittens were wrestling gently in their bed, their energy finally winding down. I thought about Mike's words, about feeling like the person I used to be. Maybe that was what was happening here. Maybe I wasn't becoming someone new. Maybe I was remembering who I'd always been underneath all the armor I'd built around myself. Outside, Chicago glittered in the autumn night, but inside, my home felt truly warm for the first time since I'd bought it. As I carried my laptop to the office and settled in for an hour of work before bed, Pearl followed me and curled up on a stack of financial reports. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new deals, new decisions. But tonight, I had everything I needed right here in this transformed space that had somehow become a real home. 6 weeks had passed since that rainy November night, and the kittens were no longer helpless newborns. They were 8 weeks old now, small but fierce explorers who had claimed every corner of my condo as their kingdom. Pearl had discovered she could open cabinet doors, leading to a morning when I found my kitchen scattered with Tupperware and measuring cups. Socks had developed a talent for hiding in impossible places, giving me several heart attacks when I couldn't locate her. King had grown into his name, commanding the highest perches and surveying his domain with regal authority. But with their growth came a reality I'd been avoiding. Dr. Hernandez had gently suggested it was time to consider their future. "They're weaned now," she explained during her latest visit, watching the kittens play with a complicated toy I'd impulse bought online. "Sophia's done her job beautifully. They're healthy, socialized, and ready for their next chapter." "Their next chapter?" I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. "Finding them permanent homes, Richard. You can't keep 4 cats in a condo, especially with your work schedule. These babies need families who can give them the attention they deserve." The words hit me like a physical blow. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I'd known this moment would come, but I'd managed to push it away, focusing instead on the daily routine of care and the simple joy of watching them grow. The thought of separating them, of breaking up this little family that had saved me as much as I'd saved them, felt impossible. That evening, I sat on my office floor with my laptop, supposedly reviewing contracts for the Patterson merger, but actually watching Pearl attempt to catch the cursor on my screen. Every time she pounced, missing the elusive arrow, she'd look at me with such determination that I couldn't help but smile. How could I give this up? How could I give her up? My phone buzzed with a text from Elena, the first direct communication we'd had in over a year. "Heard through the grapevine you've become a cat dad. Never would have predicted that." There was a party emoji at the end, which felt surreal given our history. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Life has a way of surprising us," I typed back. Her reply came quickly. The Richard I knew was allergic to anything that couldn't be controlled with a spreadsheet. "Maybe you've changed more than I thought." Maybe I had. The man who'd lived in this condo 6 weeks ago wouldn't have understood the current version of me. The one who scheduled conference calls around nap times and had converted his walk-in closet into a cat playground. That man had measured success in stock prices and quarterly growth. This man found success in the trust of a gray and white cat who still chose to sleep beside him every night. But Dr. Hernandez was right about the practical realities. My condo, for all its luxury, wasn't designed for 4 cats. My work schedule, though more flexible than it used to be, still demanded long hours and frequent travel. And the kittens deserved families who could devote themselves fully to their care. The next morning brought an unexpected solution, though not one I'd anticipated. Sarah knocked on my office door with an unusual expression. somewhere between nervous and excited. "Mr. Harrison, I hope you don't mind, but I mentioned your cats to my neighbor and she's very interested in adopting one of the kittens." "Your neighbor?" "Mrs. Chen. She's retired, widowed last year, and has been terribly lonely. She had cats for 30 years before her last one passed away 6 months ago. She's experienced, patient, and has all the time in the world to spoil a kitten." I felt a strange mixture of relief and loss. "Which kitten is she interested in?" "She said she'd love to meet them all and see which one chooses her. She believes cats pick their families as much as families pick cats." That afternoon, Mrs. Chen arrived at my condo. A small, elegant woman in her 70s with gentle hands and kind eyes that reminded me of Sophia's. She sat on my living room floor and let the kittens approach her naturally. Pearl, my little explorer, was the first to investigate, climbing into her lap and purring immediately. "This one," Mrs. Chen said softly, stroking Pearl's tiny head. "She has a brave heart, I can tell." I watched Pearl settle contentedly in this stranger's arms, and despite the ache in my chest, I knew it was right. Mrs. Chen would give her the individual attention she deserved, the kind of focused care I couldn't provide while juggling 3 cats and a demanding career. Over the next week, word spread through the building. Marcus, the security guard, had been waiting for the right moment to ask about socks for his daughter, who was starting veterinary school and could benefit from learning hands-on care. Dr. Hernandez herself had fallen in love with King during her visits and asked if she could give him a home where he'd be surrounded by other animals and constant veterinary attention. Each placement felt perfect, tailored to the individual personality of each kitten, but that didn't make the approaching separation any easier. I found myself memorizing their sleeping positions, their play habits, the way each one greeted me when I came home from work. These small details had become the rhythm of my life. The night before the first adoption, Pearl going to Mrs. Chen, I sat in the guest bedroom that had become their nursery, watching the 4 cats sleep together one last time. Sophia seemed to sense the change coming. She'd been more affectionate lately, often sitting close to me with an intensity that felt like she was trying to tell me something. "I know, girl," I whispered to her. "Change is hard, even when it's right." She moved closer and rested her head against my hand, purring softly. In that moment, I made a decision that felt as natural as breathing. "You're staying with me," I told her. "We're family now. Whatever comes next, we face it together." The relief in her green eyes was unmistakable, as if she'd been waiting for that reassurance. Tomorrow would bring the first goodbye, and the days that followed would reshape our small family once again. But tonight we were all together, safe and warm in the home we'd built from nothing but trust and unexpected love. As I settled in to sleep beside their nest one last time, I realized that letting go wasn't the opposite of love. Sometimes it was the highest expression of it. The morning Pearl left for her new home with Mrs. Chen was harder than I'd anticipated. Despite knowing it was the right decision, watching my little explorer disappear into the elevator with her new mother felt like losing a piece of my heart. But Mrs. Chen had promised regular updates, and I knew Pearl would be cherished. Sophia seemed to understand what was happening. Throughout the morning, she'd been extra attentive to Pearl, grooming her thoroughly and staying close. When the time came for the goodbye, she sat quietly beside me, watching as Pearl was placed in her carrier. There was something dignified about her acceptance, as if she trusted my judgment completely. "She'll have a good life," I told Sophia, as we stood alone in my suddenly quieter living room. "Mrs. Chen will spoil her properly." Socks left the following Tuesday, going home with Marcus and his daughter. The 18-year-old pre-vet student was nervous but excited, promising to send photos and updates about Socks's progress. Marcus himself seemed as thrilled as his daughter, confessing that he'd grown attached to all the cats during his interactions with them in the lobby. King's departure the next Friday was the most emotional. Dr. Hernandez had fallen genuinely in love with him during her visits, and he'd always been drawn to her gentle, confident energy. When she arrived to take him to his new home, a veterinary clinic where he'd be surrounded by other animals and constant care, he went to her immediately, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "He'll help me train new vet techs," Dr. Hernandez explained, scratching behind his ears. "Cats are excellent judges of character. King will help me identify which students have the right temperament for this work." After each goodbye, my condo felt different. The spaces the kittens had claimed slowly returned to their original purposes, though I found myself leaving their favorite toys scattered around. The climbing tree stayed in the corner of the living room. Sophia used it daily, and somehow it had become as much a part of the decor as any expensive art piece. But the most significant change was in my relationship with Sophia herself. With her babies safely placed in loving homes, she seemed to relax completely for the first time since I'd found her. She began following me around the condo, participating in my daily routine in ways that felt like true companionship. She learned my schedule quickly. Every morning at 6 a.m., she'd wake me with gentle headbutts and purring, leading me to the kitchen where she'd sit patiently while I made coffee. She claimed a spot on my office desk, positioning herself where she could watch me work while staying within reach for occasional pets. In the evenings, she'd join me on the couch, purring contentedly while I read reports or watched the news. The real revelation came during my first business trip since adopting her. I'd arranged for Maria, my housekeeper, to check on Sophia daily, but I worried constantly while I was away. When I returned from 3 days in New York, Sophia met me at the elevator with an enthusiasm that took my breath away. She wound around my legs, purring loudly, and didn't leave my side for the rest of the evening. "I missed you too, girl," I told her, surprised by how true it was. The empty hotel room, the sterile conference rooms, the polite but distant business dinners, none of it had felt like real life. Real life was here, in this condo with this remarkable cat who'd somehow decided I was worth loving. My brother Mike noticed the change immediately when he visited for Thanksgiving. It was the first time family had stayed at my place in years. Previously, the condo had felt too formal, too much like a museum for comfortable family gatherings. "This place feels completely different," Mike said, watching Sophia investigate his suitcase with dignified curiosity. "It actually feels like a home now." "Sophia's influence," I explained, scratching behind her ears. "She's an excellent interior decorator." Danny, my nephew, was instantly smitten. At 8 years old, he had the kind of unfiltered enthusiasm that brought out Sophia's playful side. She seemed to understand that children required different energy than adults, engaging with his games while maintaining her natural grace. "Can we get a cat like Sophia?" Danny asked his father, who glanced at me with amusement. "Uncle Richard got lucky finding Sophia," Mike replied. "She's 1 in a million." He was right. Over the months that followed, I began to understand just how unique our bond was. Dr. Hernandez, during one of her regular checkups, commented on Sophia's unusual attachment to me. "Most cats bond with their territory first, their people second," she explained. "Sophia's different. She's bonded with you first. This condo could be anywhere. It's you she's chosen as family." The truth of that became evident whenever guests visited. Sophia was polite but reserved with strangers, only becoming her full, affectionate self when we were alone together. She seemed to understand that our relationship was special, something that existed apart from the rest of the world. My work life had found a new equilibrium as well. The flexibility I'd developed during the kittens' early weeks had become permanent. I still closed the important deals, still led the crucial meetings, but I'd learned to set boundaries that protected the life I'd built at home. Conference calls were scheduled around Sophia's mealtimes. Business trips were planned with her needs in mind. The most unexpected development was how Sophia had affected my other relationships. Having her in my life had somehow made me more open to human connection as well. I'd reconnected with old friends, grown closer to my brother's family, and even begun dating again, something I'd thought impossible after Elena. One evening in early spring, as I sat on my couch with Sophia purring beside me, I reflected on the transformation that had begun at that bus stop 6 months earlier. The man who'd found a shivering cat and her babies had been successful but empty, accomplished but alone. The man who sat here now had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in stock portfolios or real estate values. True wealth was the trust of a remarkable cat who'd chosen to share her life with mine. It was the knowledge that I had something to come home to every day, someone who depended on me and whom I could depend on in return. Outside my windows, Chicago sparkled in the spring twilight, but I wasn't looking at the city lights anymore. I was looking at Sophia, who'd opened her green eyes just enough to check that I was still there before settling back into her contented sleep. For the first time in my adult life, I was exactly where I belonged. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late May, shattering the peaceful routine Sophia and I had established over the past 6 months. Dr. Hernandez's voice was gentle but serious, as she delivered news that would test everything we'd built together. "The test came back, Richard. I'm afraid Sophia has early-stage kidney disease." I stared out my office window at Lake Michigan, the phone pressed against my ear, trying to process words that seemed impossible. Sophia was only 3 years old, too young for such a diagnosis. She'd been eating well, playing, showing no signs of illness beyond drinking slightly more water than usual, which Dr. Hernandez had decided to investigate during her last routine checkup. What does that mean? I asked, though part of me already knew. With proper management, she can live a good life for years, Dr. Hernandez explained. Special diet, medications, regular monitoring. It's not a death sentence, but it will require dedication. The treatment isn't cheap, and it means lifestyle adjustments for both of you. After hanging up, I sat in my office chair, staring at the financial reports on my desk that suddenly seemed meaningless. Sophia was curled up in her usual spot on my desk, sleeping peacefully in a patch of sunlight, unaware that our world had just shifted. The irony wasn't lost on me. 6 months ago, I would have seen a sick pet as a liability, a complication to be managed or eliminated. Now, the thought of losing Sophia felt like contemplating the loss of a family member, because that's exactly what she was. Dr. Hernandez came by that evening to explain the treatment plan. Special prescription food that cost 3 times as much as regular cat food. Daily medications that would need to be administered with precision. Weekly subcutaneous fluid treatments that I would need to learn to do myself. Regular blood work to monitor her kidney function. This is a significant commitment, she said, watching me take notes on everything she explained. Some people in your situation might consider. She didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. That's not an option, I said firmly. Whatever she needs, we'll make it work. Dr. Hernandez smiled. I hoped you'd say that. Sophia's lucky to have you. But as the weeks passed, I began to understand the full scope of what making it work would mean. The daily medications were straightforward enough. Sophia took them mixed with treats, trusting me completely, even when the pills made her food taste different. The special diet required careful measurement and timing, but the subcutaneous fluids were the real challenge. 3 times a week, I had to insert a small needle under Sophia's skin and allow a bag of fluids to drip into her system, a process that took 15 minutes and required her to remain still while connected to an IV-like setup. The first few attempts were disasters of epic proportions, with Sophia trying to escape and me fumbling with equipment that seemed designed for someone with veterinary training. "I'm sorry, girl," I'd whisper after each failed attempt, my hands shaking from the stress of causing her discomfort. "I'm trying to help." She seemed to understand. By the 3rd week, she'd learned to sit patiently during the treatments, purring softly while I held her and the fluid slowly dripped into her system. Her trust in me during these vulnerable moments was humbling. The financial impact was significant but manageable. Thousands of dollars in monthly expenses that would have been unthinkable for a pet 6 months earlier, but now felt like the most important investment I'd ever made. I canceled a planned vacation to Tuscany without a second thought, redirecting the money toward Sophia's medical fund. But the emotional toll was harder to quantify. Every day brought the awareness that our time together was finite, in a way it hadn't been before. I found myself watching her more closely, cataloging her behaviors, treasuring the ordinary moments that I'd previously taken for granted. The diagnosis also revealed something I hadn't expected: how deeply Sophia had become woven into the fabric of my life beyond just our personal relationship. When word spread through my building about her condition, the outpouring of support was remarkable. Mrs. Chen, Pearl's adoptive mother, sent flowers and a card expressing her concern. Marcus asked daily about Sophia's progress and shared stories of his daughter's veterinary training. My housekeeper Maria began staying later to help with treatments when I had late meetings. Even my assistant Sarah started asking about Sophia's health before discussing business matters. "She's become the building's mascot," James, my driver, observed one morning. "Everyone's invested in her recovery." Most surprising was the call from Elena. We hadn't spoken since her text months earlier, but somehow she'd heard about Sophia's diagnosis through our mutual connections. "I wanted you to know I'm thinking of you both," she said, her voice carrying a warmth I remembered from better times. "I know how much she means to you. How did you—" Sarah mentioned it to Rebecca at that charity gala last week. Word travels fast in our circles. There was a pause. "Richard, the way you're caring for her, it shows a side of you I always hoped existed but wasn't sure I'd ever see." After she hung up, I realized that Sophia's illness had revealed something important. The man I'd become through loving her was someone worth loving in return. The capacity for devotion, for putting another being's needs before my own comfort. These weren't qualities I'd known I possessed. The treatment routine became its own form of meditation. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evening, Sophia and I would settle into our corner of the living room for her fluid therapy. I'd talk to her during the treatments, sharing my day, my concerns about work, my hopes for her recovery. She'd purr and occasionally reach out a paw to touch my hand, as if reassuring me that we were in this together. 3 months into the treatment, the test results showed improvement. Her kidney function had stabilized, and Dr. Hernandez was cautiously optimistic about the long-term prognosis. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it," she said, reviewing the blood work. "Sophia's responding beautifully to the treatment. Her quality of life is excellent." That night, as I sat with Sophia purring beside me on the couch, I realized that her illness had taught me something profound about love. Real love wasn't just about the easy moments, the playful mornings and comfortable evenings. Real love was about showing up when things got difficult, about choosing commitment over convenience, about finding meaning in the act of caring itself. Sophia's diagnosis had initially felt like a crisis, but it had actually become a gift. It had shown me that the depth of my devotion to her was real and lasting. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, one day at a time. 2 years had passed since Dr. Hernandez first delivered Sophia's diagnosis, and our life had settled into a rhythm that felt both precious and purposeful. The treatments had become second nature, a part of our routine that no longer felt like medical intervention but simply like caring for family. Sophia's kidney function had remained stable, and her quality of life was everything we could have hoped for. On this particular November evening, as rain drummed against the windows of my condo just as it had that night 2.5 years ago, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. Sophia was curled beside me on the couch, her gray and white fur now touched with the subtle changes of a 5-year-old cat, but her green eyes still bright with intelligence and affection. The anniversary of our meeting was approaching, and I'd been thinking about that desperate young mother cat I'd found shivering at the bus stop. The transformation wasn't just hers, it was mine too. The man who'd found her that night had been successful but hollow, accomplished but alone. The man sitting here now understood that true success couldn't be measured in quarterly reports or stock prices. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen, accompanied by a photo of Pearl, now an elegant 2-year-old cat with the same brave spirit she'd shown as a kitten. "Pearl says hello to her mama," the message read. These regular updates from the kitten's adoptive families had become treasured connections, a way of staying linked to the extended family we'd created. Marcus had retired 6 months earlier, but his daughter regularly sent photos of Socks, who'd become something of a celebrity at the veterinary school where she was studying. Dr. Hernandez still visited monthly for Sophia's checkups and always brought news of King, who'd become the official greeter at her clinic, and was apparently considering a career in animal therapy. The ripple effects of that November night continued to amaze me. What had started as a simple act of compassion had created a network of connections that enriched all our lives. But more than that, it had fundamentally changed how I understood my place in the world. At work, I'd developed a reputation for a leadership style that valued people over pure profit. The quarterly numbers remained strong, better than ever actually, but I'd learned that sustainable success came from creating environments where people could thrive, not just perform. Several of my employees had come to me over the past year with personal challenges, knowing they'd find understanding rather than judgment. "You've become the kind of boss people actually want to work for," Sarah had observed recently. "It's like you learned empathy somewhere along the way." She wasn't wrong. Caring for Sophia, through health crises, daily routines, and the simple act of showing up consistently, had taught me skills that translated directly to human relationships. Patience, attentiveness, the ability to find joy in small moments, the commitment to see challenges through to resolution. My personal life had flourished as well. Dating again had felt impossible after Elena, but meeting Jennifer 6 months ago had shown me that I was capable of opening my heart to human love again, without sacrificing the bond I shared with Sophia. Jennifer was a social worker who understood immediately that Sophia wasn't just a pet, but a family member, and she'd integrated naturally into our routine. "She chose you too," Jennifer had observed, watching Sophia accept her presence with regal approval. "She's very particular about who gets to be part of her human's life." This evening, as I prepared Sophia's medications and set up for her weekly fluid treatment, I thought about the conversation I'd had earlier with my brother Mike. He'd called to say that Danny, now 10 years old, had decided he wanted to become a veterinarian when he grew up, inspired by Uncle Richard's cat stories. You realize you've influenced his entire life trajectory, Mike had said. He talks about Sophia like she's a celebrity. Maybe she was, in her own way. The story of the executive who'd found a family at a bus stop had become something of a legend in our social circle. But I preferred to think of it simply as the story of how love finds you when you're finally ready to receive it. As I settled beside Sophia for her treatment, she positioned herself comfortably and began purring before I'd even started the IV. This routine that had once seemed overwhelming was now a time of connection. A few minutes where the outside world fell away, and there was only the two of us, taking care of each other. "Remember when this used to be scary?" I asked her, gently inserting the needle. She barely flinched, trusting me completely with her care. Through the window I could see the same bus stop where our story had begun. New people huddled there now, waiting for late buses, rushing home to their own versions of family. I wondered if any of them would have their lives changed tonight by an unexpected encounter, an opportunity to choose compassion over convenience. My phone rang, a video call from Dr. Hernandez, who was checking in on our evening routine. "How's our girl doing?" she asked, seeing Sophia settled peacefully beside me. "Perfect, as always. Her appetite's good, energy levels normal, no changes in behavior." "Excellent. You know, Richard, in all my years of practice, I've rarely seen such a successful management of feline kidney disease. Your consistency with her care has been remarkable." After the call ended, I continued holding Sophia as the last of the fluids dripped into her system. In 15 minutes, I'd remove the needle, give her a treat, and settle in for the evening's routine of work calls and reading. Tomorrow would bring new challenges at the office, new decisions to make, new problems to solve. But tonight, I was exactly where I belonged. Home with the family member who'd taught me that the most profound successes in life couldn't be bought, earned, or achieved through effort alone. They could only be received with an open heart and nurtured with consistent love. As I removed the IV and gave Sophia her favorite salmon treat, she settled against my side with the contented purr that had become the soundtrack to the best years of my life. Outside, Chicago glittered in the November night, but inside, our small family was complete. The rain continued to fall, just as it had that night when a desperate mother cat had trusted a stranger with her baby's lives. But now it sounded different. Not harsh and threatening, but gentle and cleansing, washing the city clean for whatever stories would begin tomorrow. I'd learned something profound in these years with Sophia. Love doesn't always arrive as we expect it to. Sometimes it comes disguised as responsibility, as challenge, as an opportunity to become better than we knew we could be. Sometimes it comes shivering at a bus stop, asking not for grand gestures but simply for someone to care. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, love comes with green eyes and a grateful purr, transforming not just our homes, but our hearts, teaching us that the most valuable thing we can build isn't a fortune or a reputation, but a life worth sharing. As Sophia settled into sleep beside me, I realized that our story wasn't ending. It was still being written, one day of devotion at a time, and I wouldn't change a single chapter of the journey that had brought us here, to this moment of perfect contentment in the home we'd made together. The lonely CEO had found more than cats at that bus stop. He'd found himself.